Theodore Marcus Blackwell had been a cardiologist for 37 years, and in 37 years he had learned that the heart is more honest than most people give it credit for. It tells you the truth with the consistency of a machine that does not know how to lie. The murmur is there, or it is not. The rhythm is regular, or it is not. The ejection fraction is within normal parameters, or it has departed from them in a way that is going to require attention. He had spent 37 years listening to hearts and translating what they said into something his patients could act on, and he had found that the work of translation was often the harder work, because the truth the heart was telling was sometimes a truth people were not ready to receive. He had learned over those 37 years to give the truth in the way that gave it the best chance of being received with precision, with patience, without the performance of kindness that softens a truth until it is no longer true. This was also the correct method for giving the truth in other contexts, and he had applied it to every context his life had presented him with, including parking lots on November mornings. He was 68 years old, retired 4 years with the bearing of someone who has spent a career in rooms where other people's mortality was the subject, and who has learned in those rooms to be fully present without being consumed. He was tall and spare, with the natural silver at his temples that had come in his 40s, and which his wife Margaret had always called distinguished without irony. He had his M.D. from Johns Hopkins, where he had graduated in the top 4% of his class, which was not something he mentioned in conversation, but which his department chair had mentioned at his retirement ceremony, and which had been true, and which was the kind of thing that a man who has spent 37 years caring about performance, rather than the acknowledgement of performance, finds both gratifying and beside the point. He had completed his residency at Hargrove Regional Hospital and had returned to Hargrove as an attending physician 14 years later. Because Hargrove was where he had understood what the work required and where the community he most wanted to serve was located. He had become Chief of Cardiology for the last 14 years of his active practice, which was a role that had required him to be both physician and administrator, and which he had accepted because he understood that the quality of the department affected the quality of care for the patients of every physician in it, and that the department's quality was his responsibility if he had the capacity to shape it. He had authored 3 medical textbooks. The first, on the management of coronary artery disease in patients over 65, had been through 4 editions and was used in 9 medical schools. The second, a clinical reference guide to echocardiography interpretation, was the text he was most proud of because it had begun as the notes he had made for his fellows and had grown into something that had actually changed how cardiologists talked about a specific kind of structural abnormality, which was the kind of contribution that changed things in the quiet, incremental way that most of medicine's actual progress happened. The third was a memoir of sorts, 37 years of cases, and what they had taught him, written for residents and fellows, and published the year after his retirement, which had received a review in the journal that called it the most honest book about the practice of cardiology in 30 years. He had trained 41 cardiology fellows. He had kept in contact with 37 of them. He tracked their careers with the attention that a teacher brings to the students they have most believed in, because he believed in all of them, and the belief was not contingent on outcome. He had given the commencement address at the medical school graduation the year before his retirement. He had said, "You will know soon that the heart is honest. The challenge is that honesty is not the same as simplicity. Your life in cardiology will be spent in the space between those two things." He had meant every word. He still did. He played golf every Thursday morning. He had played golf every Thursday morning for 22 years since the spring of the year he turned 46, which was the year Margaret had enrolled them both in the club's new member orientation and had handed him the clubs she had bought him as a combination birthday and anniversary gift, and had said, "We're going to learn this together." He had been skeptical about golf for two reasons. First, that he had always understood it as a sport that rewarded patience and precision in a ratio that was not in his favor at 46, and second, that he had not had 4 hours on any given Thursday in the previous 15 years and did not know where they were going to come from. Both objections had been overridden by the following consideration: Margaret had decided. When Margaret had decided something, the question had moved from whether to how. He had learned the game with Margaret over the first summer badly and then adequately, and then with the slow, incremental improvement that comes from repetition in a game that does not reward impatience. By the fall of the second year, he was playing to a 16 handicap. By the fourth year, he was at 12. He had been an 8 handicap for the past 7 years, which was a level of play that he was satisfied with, and which he had decided to stop trying to improve, because improvement would require a degree of practice that would make the game into work, and the game was not work. The game was Thursday. He had joined Pemberton Hills Golf Club 22 years ago at the insistence of his wife. Margaret Eleanor Blackwell had believed with a conviction he had respected and eventually adopted that the correct response to a world that placed barriers in your way was to walk through the barriers rather than around them. She had been a federal public defender for 28 years, which had given her a specific relationship to institutions. The understanding that institutions could be wrong, and the further understanding that the way to correct an institution was to be inside it, doing the work on the record and not to leave the field to the people who preferred your absence. She had joined organizations that did not always expect her. She had filled rooms that had not been built with her in mind. She had made in those rooms contributions that had been acknowledged over time with the particular acknowledgement that comes when the contribution is too significant to ignore. She had won 3 cases that were considered unwinnable. She had written briefs that had been cited by 2 circuit courts and once by a Supreme Court justice in a concurring opinion that she had framed and hung in her office, not out of pride exactly, but because she believed that the argument mattered, and the argument had been heard in the right place, and the frame was a record of that. She had mentored 14 young public defenders who had gone on to careers she had read about with the specific satisfaction of a teacher whose students had not wasted what they were given. She had been offered a federal judgeship at 53 and had declined it because she had thought carefully about what she was most useful doing and had concluded that the work at the defender's office was not yet done and she was not yet the right person to stop doing it. She had played golf because Ted played golf, which she had always considered a reasonable basis for adopting a game and had found in the 4 years she played it before the diagnosis that she was naturally good at it, in the specific way that she was naturally good at things that rewarded precision and patience. She had made a hole-in-one on the 4th hole in June of 2008. She had looked at the ball disappearing into the cup with an expression that Ted had photographed from 20 yards away, and which remained on his desk at home because it was the expression of someone who has expected good things and has received one and is for a moment exactly as delighted as the moment deserves. She had said to Ted in 1999 when they had first talked about the club, "Ted, we have earned every room we walk into." Walk in. She had meant it as a description of reality, not as an aspiration. They had earned it. The earning was not in question. He had spent 37 years in medicine, becoming one of the most respected cardiologists in the region. She had spent 28 years in law, becoming one of the most effective public defenders the federal system had produced in this district. The earning was not in question. The question was whether you claimed what you had earned or whether you allowed other people's discomfort with your presence to determine the shape of your life. She had made her choice 30 years before joining the club. She had not revisited it. She had also said separately in a conversation about a different institution that had been reluctant to acknowledge her, "They can be reluctant. They cannot be more reluctant than I am willing to be patient." She had said this with the complete composure of a person who has outlasted institutions before and expects to outlast them again. She had been right both times she had said it in Ted's hearing, The institutions had come around. The record had been made. She had continued her work. She had told him in the week before her death, when he had been sitting beside her bed in the hospital room, that he had known professionally for 37 years and was now inhabiting from the other side. You are going to continue everything. This is not a request. It is a prediction. He had said, I know. She had said the club too. He had said especially the club. She had found enough to smile at that which had cost her something, and they had been quiet together for a while in the particular quality of time that exists in those rooms. Ted had continued. He had joined the club in 1999 and had kept his membership for 22 years and had played every Thursday and had been Ted Blackwell of Pemberton Hills, and nobody had questioned it for 22 years. And on a Thursday morning in November, an officer had questioned it for 22 minutes, and the record of those 22 minutes was now in the precinct's files, and in his attorney's files, and in the club's board minutes, and in the cabinet in his study at home. He had earned this room. He had walked in for 22 years. He intended to continue. Margaret had predicted it. He was not going to prove her wrong on this one or on any other count where she had been right, which was most of the important counts, which was what 34 years of marriage to a woman of that quality gives you if you are paying attention. She had died 4 years ago in October of pancreatic cancer, which had been diagnosed in August and had been rapid in the way that that particular cancer was sometimes rapid. Ted had continued his Thursday golf because Margaret would have expected him to continue, because the game had been something they both valued, because the 3 men who were his regular partners had been his friends for 18 years and had shown up in the months after Margaret's death with the specific consistency of people who understood that presence over time was the form that support took. He played for the same reasons he had always played: the precision the game required, the physical engagement of the swing and the walk, the particular pleasure of a Thursday morning in which everything that needed to be attended to could wait for 4 hours while he attended to the ball in front of him. He drove Margaret's car. It was a 2019 Mercedes C-Class sedan in dark navy, which Margaret had bought the January before the diagnosis, and which she had driven for 8 months with the particular pleasure she brought to things she had chosen for herself. The deliberate choice of that specific color, that specific interior, because the dark navy was elegant without being showy, and the interior was correct. When she died, the car had passed to him in the estate. He had changed the registration to his name, and had maintained it with the care she would have brought to it. The same service schedule, the same detailer who had cared for it since she bought it, the same parking habits she had used, which were careful and considered. It smelled faintly of the cedar sachets she had kept in the glove compartment, and which he had not replaced when they ran out, because the faint cedar smell was a form of presence, and he was not ready to give that up. He was aware that this was a form of grief, and he did not apologize for it to himself or to anyone. The grief was real, and the cedar smell was part of the grief, and the grief had not prevented him from anything which was what mattered. He pulled into the Pemberton Hills Golf Club members' lot at 6:48 on a Thursday morning in November. The sky was the early dark of November mornings that have not yet been reached by the sun, the particular dark blue quality of the sky between 5:30 and 7 in November, when the sun has not risen but has begun its preparation, and the parking lot lights were still doing the work the sun would take over in another 40 minutes. The air was 36 degrees, which was cold enough that he had worn the lined wind jacket Margaret had given him 3 Christmases ago. The one in the dark green that matched his golf bag, which was in the club's storage locker, where it had lived for 4 years, and which Alice, who had known his routine for 12 of her 16 years at the club, would have already pulled from the locker and placed on the cart reserved for his Thursday group. This was a thing Alice did without being asked. Because Alice understood that the function of good service was to think of what was needed before the need was expressed, which was a form of attention that Ted had always appreciated, and which was part of why he had been coming back to this club every Thursday for 22 years, without once considering going elsewhere. He took the same spot he always took, third from the entrance on the left side under the oak tree that had been there longer than the club itself, which had been built in 1962 on land that had been a farm, and before that a forest, and before that whatever it had been before the settlers came, which was none of his business, and all of his business simultaneously. The oak tree had been there for all of it. He had been taking this spot for 22 years. The other members who arrived early knew that the spot under the oak was Ted Blackwell's spot, in the way that regular golfers know the habits of regular golfers, not through any posted rule or explicit agreement, but through the organic recognition that some things are organized without being declared. Because organization is a form of respect, and respect is a form of community. And this club was to Ted a community. He had been part of that community for 22 years. He had buried his wife 4 years ago and had come back the following Thursday because the community was still here, and the game was still here, and Margaret's golf bag was still in the storage locker, and he was still himself, which was the thing she would have wanted confirmed. He got out of the car. He reached into the back seat for his golf shoes, which were in the bag he kept there, and he was in the process of setting the bag on the hood to find the shoes, the specific November air on his hands, the particular early morning cold that makes you aware of your fingers when the cruiser pulled into the member's lot. The officer parked behind him. He came out of the cruiser with the forward energy of someone who has made an assessment and is moving to act on it. He was 31 years old. Officer Damon Friese, 4 years on the force assigned to the precinct that covered this section of the district, and he had been on a routine patrol on Pemberton Road when he had seen the dark navy sedan slow and turn into the club's members' lot. He had noted the time, 6:48, and had noted the fact that the members' lot was otherwise empty because most members of a golf club did not arrive for morning rounds at 6:48, and he had made a decision about what he was looking at. The decision had arrived before the evidence had been gathered. This was the error. This was in the terms the review board would later use the precipitating error from which everything that followed derived. Friese would go through training that would address this error. The error had been in him before the training began, formed by 4 years of patrol work and the specific cognitive pattern that 4 years of a certain kind of patrol work can form, and the training would give him the vocabulary to name it and the tools to interrupt it. But on a Thursday morning in November at 6:48, he did not yet have the vocabulary, and he had not yet interrupted it, and he came out of the cruiser toward a man who had a gold membership card in his pocket and a tee time in 12 minutes and 22 years of Thursdays at this club, and who was standing in the spot he had always stood in under the oak tree that had been there longer than the club. He said, "Sir, can I ask what you're doing here?" Ted set the shoe bag back in the car. He turned to face the officer. He said, "My name is Dr. Theodore Blackwell. I am a member of this club. I have a 7 o'clock tee time this morning. I arrive at 6:48 because I prefer to change my shoes in the parking lot and then go directly to the first tee." He said it the way he had said things for 37 years, with the complete, unhurried clarity of someone who has been giving information in situations that required precision and has learned that clarity is the kindest form communication can take. He was not defensive. He was not apologetic. He was stating the facts in the order that made them most usable to a person who needed them. He had spent 37 years giving patients and families the facts in the order that made them most usable. He understood that how you say a true thing determines whether the true thing can be received, and he had learned to say true things in the way that gave them the best chance of being received, and he used that learned capacity now in the members' lot with this officer because it was the correct tool for the situation, and he had it. Friese said, "Do you have your membership card?" Ted said, "I do." He reached into the interior breast pocket of his wind jacket where he kept the card because he had always kept it there in the breast pocket of whatever jacket he wore to the club. A habit formed in the first year and maintained ever since, because a thing kept in the same place is a thing that can always be found. He produced his Pemberton Hills Golf Club member card, which bore his name. His photograph from the renewal 3 years ago, his member number, and the club's seal. The card was gold, which indicated a senior member, the designation given to members of 20 or more years standing which he had attained 2 years ago and which the gold card had confirmed since. He held it out. Friese took it. He looked at it for a moment, the photograph, the name, the number, the gold color. He looked at Ted. Friese said, "I'm going to need to verify this." Ted said, "You can call the clubhouse. Alice is usually in by 6:30. The number is on the back of the card. My name is in the member directory under Blackwell Theodore. My tea time this morning is 7 o'clock, which you can also verify. I've had the 7 o'clock Thursday reservation for 19 consecutive years." Friese did not call. He held the card and looked at Ted and looked at the dark navy car with its current registration sticker and its immaculate condition and said, "Can you tell me why you're in the back of the lot?" Ted said, "I am in the third space from the entrance on the left side of the lot. It is the space under the oak tree. I take this space every Thursday because it is under the oak tree which provides shade for the car during the summer months, and I have been taking this space for 22 years. I took it this morning for the same reason I have taken it every Thursday for 22 years." He said it without emphasis, which was the appropriate register. The question did not merit the register of defensiveness or the register of irritation. It merited the register of information because it was a question about a fact, and the fact was clear and had a 22-year record behind it. Friese said, "What year did you say you joined?" Ted said 1999. "I joined with my late wife, Margaret Blackwell. We were sponsored by Robert Chen, who is a member of this club and a retired federal district court judge, and Henry Fairbanks, who is also a member and a former state senator. Both of them are arriving this morning for the 7 o'clock tea time. Mr. Chen should be here in approximately 4 minutes. Mr. Fairbanks is typically the third to arrive." Friese said, "I need you to stand back here while I verify with the club." Ted said, "Of course." He stood in the space between his car and the next car, hands at his sides, wearing his wind jacket and his golf trousers, and the expression of a man who has spent 37 years in rooms requiring patience, and is exercising it now without apparent effort. He was 68 years old. He had been in harder rooms than a parking lot at 6:51 on a Thursday morning. He had been in rooms where a family was being told for the first time the thing they had been dreading for months, and where his job was to give them the truth with enough care that the truth did not destroy them in the moment of receiving it. He had been in rooms where the treatment options were all inadequate and the decision had to be made anyway. He had been in rooms where a patient had 30 minutes and the family was not there, and he had sat with the patient and been present, because being present was the thing the room required, regardless of what else the day asked of him. A parking lot at 6:51 on a Thursday morning was not a hard room. It was an unjust situation in a parking lot, and unjust situations in parking lots were resolved by evidence and procedure and the application of the available information, and the available information supported his position from the moment the car had stopped, and the situation was going to resolve in the way that such situations resolve when the facts are clear. He believed this. He had operated on this belief for 68 years, and the belief had not been falsified. The situations had not always resolved quickly. They had not always resolved without cost. But they had resolved because the facts were the facts, and the record was the record, and both were durable in ways that the immediate situation was not. He thought about Margaret briefly, about what she would say, and about the fact that she would not say it. She would do it, which was the difference between people who think about the right response and people who have already incorporated it. She would be standing exactly where he was standing, with her hands in the same position, with the same expression. Not anger, not fear, but the complete composure of a woman who had stood in rooms where the facts supported her position and had waited with perfect patience for the facts to do their work. He thought he is going to call the clubhouse. Alice is going to confirm it, and then I am going to change my shoes and go to the first tee. That is what is going to happen. He held this thought clearly, the way he had always held things clearly in situations that required clarity. He thought about the 4 fairways he particularly liked on this course, the 4th, which had been Margaret's favorite, and the 7th, which had a par 3 across a small pond that he had been unable to par for 3 years and had parred 12 consecutive times since, which proved something about the relationship between difficulty and repetition. He thought about the November light on the fairway, which was different from every other month's light and which he had been looking forward to since the previous Thursday. He thought, I am going to par the 7th today. He held these thoughts alongside the situation because holding them was the same practice that had allowed him to sit with a patient's fear and also plan the correct intervention to be fully present in the difficulty and also fully functional within it. The 2 things were not incompatible. He had proven this for 37 years. He proved it now in the cold November parking lot while Friese held the phone to his ear, and Alice's voice came through the speaker confirming what the gold card had already confirmed. Friese called the clubhouse. The phone rang 4 times. Alice Marsh, the morning receptionist who had been at the club for 16 years and who knew every member's first name, answered on the 4th ring with Pemberton Hills good morning. Friese said, this is Officer Friese with the district precinct. I'm in the members' lot verifying a membership for a Theodore Blackwell. Alice said without hesitation. Dr. Blackwell is a senior member. He's been a member for 22 years. He plays every Thursday at 7 with Dr. Whitmore, Mr. Chen, and Mr. Fairbanks. Is everything all right? Friese said, I'm just verifying, thank you. He hung up. He looked at Ted. He said she confirmed it. Ted said, I know. May I have my card back? Friese handed the card back, but he did not step away from the space between the cars. He said, Can I ask what brings you here this early? Ted said I play golf every Thursday at 7. This is what brings me here this early. He said it without emphasis, which was more effective than emphasis would have been, because it was a statement of fact about a practice that needed no justification and was now being asked to justify itself for the 3rd time in 6 minutes. 3 cars pulled into the members' lot in quick succession. The first was Robert Chen's dark gray sedan. Robert Chen was 66 years old, a retired federal district court judge of the district court for the Eastern District, who had served 24 years on the bench and who had developed in those years the specific quality of arriving in a room and immediately understanding what the room required. He had the ability to read a situation in the time it took to walk from his car to where the situation was and to organize the relevant facts and the relevant questions in the same interval, which was a skill he had needed every day for 24 years and which did not turn off in retirement. He parked 2 spaces down from Ted's car, got out, looked at the scene, 1 man standing between the cars, 1 officer standing close, 1 police cruiser with its light still on, and walked directly toward it because directly was the only appropriate direction. The second was James Whitmore's black SUV. Dr. James Whitmore, 70 years old, orthopedic surgeon with 42 years of surgery behind him, who pulled in beside Robert and got out with the unhurried purpose of a man who has operated on patients in crisis for 4 decades and has internalized at the cellular level the understanding that the correct response to an alarming situation is not to move faster, but to think more clearly. He looked at the scene with the specific attention of someone who is taking inventory. He noted Ted's hands at his sides. He noted the officer's posture. He noted the police cruiser. He took 4 seconds to complete this inventory and then walked to where Robert was walking. The third was Henry Fairbanks's silver sedan. Henry Fairbanks, 72 years old, former state senator, 3 terms chairman of the Judiciary Committee in his 2nd term, the person who had seconded Ted Blackwell's membership application in 1999, along with Robert Chen, and who had been on the membership committee for 7 of those years, and who had in that capacity personally welcomed Ted back to the club after Margaret's death, with a handwritten note that Ted had kept in the desk in his study at home. Henry got out of his car before it had fully stopped rocking, because Henry Fairbanks had spent 30 years in rooms where you did not sit back when someone needed you to stand forward, and that 30 years had not ended when his term did. Henry came to the space between the cars. He stood beside Ted. He said, "I'm Henry Fairbanks. I've been a member of this club for 31 years, and I have known Theodore Blackwell for 18 of those years. He is my golf partner and a senior member of this club and has been for 22 years. He joined in 1999. Robert Chen and I seconded his application." What is happening here? He said it with the specific directness of a former state senator who has been in committee rooms where directness was the instrument that moved things, and who understands that what appears to be a request for information is also a statement of accountability. He was not angry, because anger was not the correct tool. He was absolutely clear, because clarity was. Friese said I was verifying the membership. Robert Chen said in the quiet voice he had used for 24 years on the bench, the membership has been verified by the club's own receptionist 6 minutes ago. What is the current basis for detaining a verified member in his own club's parking lot? He said this the way he said everything from the bench, without heat, without the performance of authority, with the complete confidence of a person who has spent 24 years speaking sentences that other people had to account for, and who understood that a clearly stated question is the most powerful instrument available in most situations. The question was clear. It required an answer. The answer did not exist. James Whitmore said quietly to Ted, "Are you all right?" Ted said, "I'm fine. The membership has been confirmed. We're resolving it." James nodded. He stood where he was standing. He was a person whose presence in a room changed the room not because he was loud, but because 42 years of surgery had given him a quality of stillness under pressure that read to anyone in the room as the stillness of someone who has seen worse and has not flinched and is not going to flinch now. Friese looked at the four men. He looked at the club's entrance where Carol Webb, the general manager, was now standing. Carol had received a call from Alice 2 minutes after the initial call and had come out. She was 53 years old, had been the club's general manager for 11 years, and was looking at the situation with the specific expression of a person who has understood something she does not want to have understood. She walked to the parking lot. Carol Webb was 53 years old, with 11 years as the club's general manager, and before that, 7 years managing a resort property in South Carolina, and before that, a career that had begun in hospitality at 19 and had moved through every level of the industry until she understood it from the inside, in a way that very few people who manage large properties understand it, not just the operations, but the philosophy, the understanding that the facility's primary obligation was to the people inside it, and that obligation was not hierarchical by any criterion except membership. She had received Alice's call at 6:58 and had come out immediately. She had been in her office reviewing the weekend staffing schedule when the call came, and she had put the schedule down and come directly because what Alice had described was a situation involving a member in the member's lot, and that was, by definition, a situation that required her. She walked across the parking lot and assessed the situation as she walked. 1 officer. 4 members. Ted, Robert, Henry, James, standing in a loose group beside Ted's car. The officer's posture unsettled, recalibrating. Ted's posture composed, unhurried, patient. She had seen Ted Blackwell in various situations over 11 years and had always found him to be the kind of person who brought the same quality of attention to every situation he was in, which was the quality of attention that does not require amplification because it is already at full. She said, "Dr. Blackwell, good morning. I'm sorry you've been held up." Ted said, "Good morning, Carol. I'll be on the tee in a few minutes." She turned to Friese. She said, "I'm Carol Webb, the general manager of Pemberton Hills Golf Club. Dr. Blackwell is a senior member of this club. He has been a member for 22 years, which is among our longest-standing memberships. His tee time this morning is 7 o'clock. His membership was confirmed by Alice Marsh, our morning receptionist, when you called at 6:52. He is our guest in this facility and has been for 22 years. I want to ask whether there is anything the club can provide to help you conclude your business here." She said it with the professional directness of a general manager who has represented a facility in various situations and has learned that the most effective register in those situations is the one that states the facts clearly and gives the other party a path to resolution without requiring them to capitulate in a way that makes resolution harder. She had given Friese a path. Is there anything the club can provide? The answer was no. He did not need anything from the club. The club had provided everything. The membership was confirmed. The member was standing here. The resolution was available. Friese looked at Carol Webb and at the three men and at Ted Blackwell, who was still standing in the space between the cars with the patient 68-year-old composure of a man who had known from 6:51 that this was going to resolve in the only way it could resolve if the facts were allowed to do their work. He looked at the gold membership card in his own hand, which he had been holding since he had taken it from Ted and had not returned. He held it out. He said, "I'm satisfied. I apologize for the delay. Have a good round." He got back in his cruiser. He pulled out of the member's lot. Carol Webb watched him go. She looked at Ted. She said, "I want to apologize on behalf of the club. This should not have happened in our lot. I'm going to take steps to make sure there is a clear protocol for this kind of situation. Ted said you didn't make it happen, but I appreciate the statement. I'll be talking to my attorney on Monday about the formal process." Carol said the club will cooperate fully. Henry Fairbanks said, "Ted, let's play golf." They changed their shoes. They went to the first tee. They teed off at 7:15, which was 15 minutes behind their usual time, which was a deviation from the schedule that Ted noted, and that he would account for on the scorecard, because he kept accurate scorecards, and an accurate scorecard was an accurate scorecard, regardless of what had happened in the parking lot. They changed their shoes in the parking lot in the November cold, which was the correct place to change them when you had been doing it that way for 22 years. Henry retrieved Ted's golf bag from the storage room and carried it to the first tee, which was not something Henry typically did, and which he did now without making it into a gesture, which was the correct way to do a thing like that. The morning was clear and 32 degrees, and the grass on the first fairway was still frosted at the edges where the shade had held, and the November light was coming from the southeast at an angle that made the frosted edges bright and the unfrosted center of the fairway a particular deep green that did not look like any other month's green. Ted had been playing this course for 22 years, and he knew what November looked like on it, and he had been looking forward to this November morning since the previous Thursday, and he was going to have it. He teed off at 7:15. The swing was correct. He had spent enough hours on this game to have a swing that was mostly correct without requiring deliberate thought, which was the point of practicing anything for long enough. The point being that eventually the correct form becomes the default, and the attention can be on something other than the form itself. The ball went where he sent it. The first hole was a par 4 straight 380 yards with a slight downhill that made the landing zone generous. He parred it. He was not playing his best round on the second and third holes. He had been distracted for those holes which he recognized as a response to the parking lot situation, and which he treated the way he had always treated distraction, not by suppressing it, because suppression was not a tool that worked, but by naming it and setting it aside. The distraction was the parking lot. The parking lot was documented. The documentation was complete. The formal response was going to be initiated on Monday. There was nothing in the parking lot situation that required his attention between now and Monday. He could attend to the fourth hole. The fourth hole was a par 4 with a dogleg left, which required a tee shot that landed slightly right of the fairway center and set up an approach from the left side of the dogleg. Ted had been playing this hole for 22 years and had developed over those 22 years the specific knowledge of it that comes from repetition, where the wind typically moved at different times of day, where the ground was likely to be soft or firm in different seasons, where the ball sat after a draw versus a fade. He played it correctly. not brilliantly correctly. He took the par. He thought about Margaret on the fourth fairway walking it in the November light and did not think about her for long because the thinking was complete. Not the grief which was not complete and which he did not expect to become complete, but the thought which was finished in the way that things become finished when you have held them for long enough. He finished the thought. He played the hole. By the seventh hole, he was playing himself back to his usual level, which was satisfying in a specific way that things are satisfying when they require effort and the effort produces the result. The seventh was the par 3 across the pond that he had been unable to par for 3 years and had now parred 12 consecutive times. He stood at the seventh tee and thought about what it had taken to par it the first time the 3 years of failure. What he had changed, the specific adjustment to the setup that had made the difference. And then he stopped thinking about it because the decision had been made about the setup, and he was now in the execution phase, and thinking about what led to the decision was not useful in the execution phase. He hit the ball. It went where he sent it, which was where he had intended to send it, which was 8 feet to the left of the cup with a slight fade that brought it to 4 feet. He made the putt. Robert Chen at the turn said, "You all right?" Ted said, "I will be." Robert said, "You're playing well." Ted said the fourth hole was the correction. Robert said, "I saw the correction. You made it." He nodded. He knew what Robert meant. Robert had been watching Ted play golf for 18 years and knew exactly what it looked like when Ted made a correction and what it meant that he had made it by the fourth hole. It meant that whatever the parking lot had done to the first 3 holes, it had not been allowed to do it to the fourth. That was the thing. Not that nothing had been done to him. That he had not allowed it to determine the shape of the morning. He made it. The complaint was filed the following Monday through Ted's attorney, a woman named Catherine Adagio, who had practiced civil rights law for 22 years, and who had been Ted's attorney in 2 prior matters, unrelated to this one, and whom he called because she was competent, and because competence was the criterion. She filed the preliminary document Monday afternoon with the precinct's Internal Affairs Office and simultaneously with the city's Police Oversight Board. The complaint described the sequence precisely the time of arrival the membership card produced on the first request, the club's confirmation by phone at 6:52. The continued detention after that confirmation, the elapsed time of 22 minutes from the stop to Friese's departure, the arrival of 3 other club members, the arrival of the general manager and the eventual departure without any finding of cause. The complaint noted that the only new information introduced after the confirmed membership was the arrival of 3 additional members, who corroborated what Ted had stated from the first minute. The complaint included a written statement from Carol Webb, which she had filed separately with the precinct and with the club's board of directors. She had filed it without being asked because she considered it part of her responsibility as the club's representative in the situation. Her statement confirmed that Dr. Blackwell was a senior member of 22 years, that his membership had been confirmed by Alice Marsh before the continued detention, and that the club had no basis and no reason to question his right to be in the members' lot at any time of day or night. She appended to her statement Alice's phone log, which showed the precise time and duration of the call from Friese. Written statements also came from Henry Fairbanks, Robert Chen, and James Whitmore, all 3 of which described what they had observed when they arrived in the members' lot. Robert Chen's statement was the longest 5 pages, and described the sequence in the precise organized language of a person who has spent 24 years constructing records that needed to be accurate and complete and that other people would have to act on. He noted the time of his arrival, the time of Friese's departure, and the time of Ted's tea time, and noted the gap between the scheduled tea time and the actual first tee, and noted that the cause of the gap was the continued detention of a member after confirmation. He did not editorialize. He did not need to. The record was the editorial. The club's board of directors met the following Thursday, which was Ted's next golf day, which he kept because keeping it was the correct response, and passed 2 resolutions. The first was a formal letter to Ted, expressing the board's regret at what had occurred in the members' lot, and reaffirming the club's commitment to every member. The letter was signed by the board's chairman, a retired investment banker named Walter Price, who had been a member for 38 years, and who had drafted the letter himself in longhand, and then had it typed and signed it again. He had called Ted before the meeting to say it was coming. Ted had thanked him. The second resolution established a new protocol for police contact in the club's facilities. Any contact between law enforcement and a club member on club property was to be referred immediately to the general manager. No member was to be detained or questioned by law enforcement on club property on the basis of a membership verification that the club's own staff had already completed. The club's staff were to be trained on this protocol within 30 days. The protocol was named in the board's minutes the Member Verification Protocol. It went into effect the following week, and Carol Webb sent a copy of it with a cover letter to Ted's attorney and to the precinct's commanding officer. The precinct's formal review of Officer Friese's conduct was completed over 4 weeks. The review examined the body camera recording from the stop, which documented the full sequence from the moment Friese approached Ted's car to the moment Friese drove away. The recording confirmed the membership card had been produced on the first request before Friese had stated any basis for the stop. The club's confirmation had been received at 6:52. The detention had continued until 7:10, 18 minutes after the membership was confirmed by the club's own staff. The additional questioning during those 18 minutes had not been predicated on any new information or any information that conflicted with what had already been confirmed. Friese received a formal reprimand and mandatory retraining on stop protocols in private commercial and recreational establishments. His supervising sergeant received a recommendation to incorporate the case as a training scenario in the precinct's annual protocol review. Ted played golf the following Thursday with Robert and Henry and James at 7 o'clock in the spot under the oak tree, which had been his spot for 22 years, and which continued to be his spot. He arrived at 6:48, as he had always arrived because 6:48 was the correct time, and the previous week had not changed what the correct time was. He parked under the oak. He changed his shoes in the parking lot. He went to the first tee. The November morning was clear and 28 degrees, which was colder than the previous week, and the frost on the fairway edges was heavier, and the light came across it in the same low slant, and made the frosted edges the same bright white, and the unfrosted center the same deep November green. The cold made the air dense, and the sounds clear, which he had always found to be one of the specific pleasures of fall golf. The particular sharp quality of the environment, the way you could hear the ball strike the club face with a clarity that summer's soft air did not provide. He teed off at 7:03, which was 3 minutes late because Robert had arrived at 6:59 and had a story to tell about his drive over that could not wait until the turn. He liked Robert's stories. He had been listening to them for 18 years, and they were reliably worth the 3 minutes. They played the first in a group of 4 at the correct pace, and the morning was the morning it was a Thursday in late November at Pemberton Hills Golf Club. 18 holes, 4 men in their 60s and 70s who had been doing this together long enough that the rhythm of the game was as familiar as the rhythm of the conversation that accompanied it. He thought about Margaret on the 4th fairway, which he had always thought of as hers, since she had made a hole-in-one there in 2008 on a Thursday morning in June, when the light had been different, the summer light full and high and warm coming straight down, rather than at an angle, making everything look simultaneous rather than consecutive. Margaret had not been a natural golfer in the technical sense, but she had understood the game's logic from the beginning, which was that you attend to the shot in front of you, and not to the shots that came before or after, which was a discipline she had already mastered in 28 years of public defense work, and which therefore transferred to the fairway without apparent effort. She had stood at the tee of the 4th hole on that Thursday morning in June, and had hit the ball, and it had disappeared into the cup, and she had looked at the place where the ball had been for a long moment, and then she had looked at Ted, and she had said, "Well, that is what that feels like." He thought about that expression. He had the photograph of it. She had not known he was photographing her. She had not been performing anything. She had been in the direct experience of something good happening and had been fully present in it, which was the way she did everything without distance, without the ironic remove that some people use to protect themselves from feeling things fully, because she had concluded early in her life that feeling things fully was the correct way to be alive, and that the ironic remove, while comfortable, produced a person who was less than what the life deserved. He thought she was right. Every room we walk into. She was right. He played the hole. He did not make a hole in one. He parred it, which was correct, and moved to the 5th. On the 7th hole, he was 4 under par for the round, which was his best start in 3 years, and which had nothing to do with the previous week, and everything to do with the cold air and the clear light and 18 years of Thursday mornings and the specific joy of the game that had been his and Margaret's, and that continued to be his, and that was not diminished by the parking lot situation, because diminishment was not permitted. Not by him, not of this. The game was the game. The morning was his. He parred the 7th. He tipped his cap to Robert, who had watched the putt from the edge of the green with the appreciation of someone who has watched a colleague execute something difficult correctly. Robert did not say anything. He did not need to. He had said everything necessary the previous Thursday at the turn I saw the correction. You made it. He finished the round at 11:42. He had shot a 76, which was not his lowest score on this course, but which was 3 strokes better than his season average, and which he would record accurately in the notebook where he kept his scorecards, because accurate records were accurate records regardless of what else was happening. He walked back to the clubhouse with Robert and Henry and James, and they had lunch at the round table near the window that looked out onto the 18th green, where he could see the morning light falling across the green in the November way. The grass close-cut and dark, the fringe just catching the light at the edge, the pin casting its shadow west because the November sun was still low and moving toward its highest point, which in November was not very high. He could see other members coming off the 18th hole as they ate. He watched them the way you watch familiar things that continue to be what they are, regardless of what has happened to you in the preceding hours. They talked about the round, about Robert's excellent drive on the 12th, which had set up a birdie that Robert had then missed by 2 inches, about James's ongoing struggle with the par 5 15th, about Henry's approach on the 16th, that had been the best approach any of them had hit all season. They talked about a law review article that had cited one of Robert's cases from 30 years ago in a way that Robert found accurate but incomplete. They talked about James's granddaughter who had been accepted to medical school at 23, which James reported with the specific pride of a person who has more pride than he is willing to fully express, and therefore expresses it in the form of objective information provided with a slight elevation of tone. They talked about a course in Scotland that Henry had played the previous summer and was recommending without reservation or caveat, which was unusual for Henry, who had reservations and caveats about most things. They talked for 2 hours, then they left. Ted drove home in Margaret's dark navy car, on the same roads he always drove the back way through the residential streets rather than the highway, because the residential streets took 12 minutes longer, and the 12 minutes were worth it for the quality of the drive. He parked in the driveway and went inside and put the kettle on and made his afternoon tea, and sat at the kitchen table with the tea and the crossword from the paper, which he did not complete on this day, because the clue for 14 across was ambiguous, in a way he found more interesting to leave unresolved than to force, and he left it and put the paper aside and sat at the table for a while, in the specific quiet of a Thursday afternoon in November, in a house that was his and had been theirs. He received a copy of the formal review finding the following week by email from Catherine Adagio's office with a cover note that summarized the key determinations and advised that the case was now closed at the precinct level with the formal reprimand and training in place, and that she would follow up in 30 days to confirm that the club's member verification protocol had been implemented as promised. He read it at the kitchen table with his afternoon tea. It said what it said. The record was accurate and complete. The determination was clear. He had been a verified member detained in the member's lot of his own club for 22 minutes after that verification was confirmed. The record said this. The record would say this as long as it existed. He filed the finding in the cabinet in his study in the section where the important documents lived, the retirement papers, the textbook contracts, the 4 editions of the coronary artery disease, textbook in their updated covers, the letter from the medical school in which the dean had called him one of the institution's most significant contributors to medical education in the past 30 years, which he had framed and put on the wall and then taken down because he felt strange about the framing and had put it in the drawer instead, unframed in its original envelope. The precinct's review of Officer Friese went in there. The club's formal letter of regret signed by Walter Price in longhand went in there. The member verification protocol typed and official went in there. Catherine Adagio's 30-day follow-up confirmation, which came and confirmed that the protocol was in place, went in there. These were all part of the record of Theodore Marcus Blackwell, retired Chief of Cardiology member of Pemberton Hills Golf Club for 22 years, husband of Margaret Eleanor Blackwell, father of 2, grandfather of 3, physician and educator and golfer, and the man who walked in. He walked in every Thursday at 6:48 under the oak that had been there since before the club in the 3rd space from the entrance on the left side. He walked in. Margaret had told him to. She had always been right about the important things. He had evidence for this across 34 years, and he treated it the way he treated all evidence. He took it seriously. He let it inform his behavior, and he did not require it to be more dramatic than it was in order to be significant. She had told him to walk in. He had walked in. She had told him he would continue. He had continued. The parking lot had not changed either of these things. He parked under the oak at 6:48 because 6:48 was the correct time, and the correct time did not change because of what had happened in the lot the previous Thursday. He took his card from his breast pocket because the card was always in his breast pocket, because things kept in the same place are always available when needed. He went to the first tee. He played his round. He played it well. He played it in the morning light on a course he had been playing for 22 years, in the company of 3 men he had been playing it with for 18 in the life that was his and that had always been his and that would continue to be his on the following Thursday and the Thursday after that. Subscribe our channel. We find the record and we read what it says. The membership card is gold. The oak tree was there before the club was built and will be there after. The record goes in the cabinet with the other records. The formal review has been completed. The protocol is in place. The Thursday tea time remains at 7 o'clock. We do not stop until the record is complete. The